Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. We're excited that you've joined us. Our topic today is building an unbreakable DevOps pipeline with Google Cloud. What a great timely topic. Our webinar today is sponsored by xMatters. My name is Mitch Ashley, and I'm going to serve as your host and moderator. A few housekeeping items. Webinar is being recorded, and all participants will receive an email with a link to the recording as well as the slides. We also have two $50 gift certificates we'll be giving away at the end of the webinar, so stick around. You may win one. Also, I'd like to say that our speakers, and we have 3 speakers today, looking forward to this conversation that they're going to have. They love questions, so we would really appreciate any questions that you have by just tossing them into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar software. You can ask them at any time, and we'll fit them in at the end and try to get to everyone's questions. So now let's move on to our topic, building an unbreakable DevOps pipeline with Google Cloud. We have 3 speakers, and I'm going to start by introducing our first, Travis DePuy, who is head Product Evangelist at xMatters. Travis, take it away and introduce the team.
Great, thanks, Mitch. I'm actually just going to jump into the agenda real quick, just so we have a good roadmap of what we're going to be looking at. So we'll start with introductions. Who are these people that are going to be talking for the next little while? Then we'll get into really what is cloud deployment, touch on a little bit of history. So we have a baseline for where it all comes from, current practices, and then transition into best practices. So you can get, seamless deployments out there. Currently, what teams are using, the various people that, the 3 of us have interact with. And then finally, we'll wrap up with taking advantage of, your new cloud life. So what does it look like in production? How do you, what do you do from there? And then finally wrap up with Q&A. So keep those questions ready. We'll get to them at the end. So as Mitch mentioned, I am Travis DePuy. I'm the Product Evangelist at xMatters. You can follow me on xm_tinkerer. And also with us today, we have Priyanka. Go ahead and let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Priyanka Vergardia. I'm a developer advocate at Google Cloud, and you might have seen me here and there around on some of the Google Cloud content that I produce for the Google Cloud YouTube channel. You can also find me on Twitter at @pvergardia, and I'm super excited to be here today to talk about DevOps.
And hi, I'm Seth Moffitt, Solution Architect for SADA. SADA is Google's #1 partner globally. We do support a wide fleet of Google products such as G Suite and Maps, myself personally on the GCP side. And best way to kind of think of us is a consultation and services arm for the Google Cloud platform.
Cool, thanks guys. So let's start with, what is cloud deployment? What does all this mean? Seth, I think you have some history in here.
Yeah, so before this whole cloud journey for myself, I've actually sold Dell hardware for a number of years. And so, back in the day, I guess, as we were discussing here earlier about the history of what is cloud deployment, how have things really worked, had a lot of customers and personal experience with those people as they were kind of transitioning themselves from how do we do things from physical to virtual, even now moving people from virtual on-premise to the cloud. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of the times back in the day, it'd just be people having a server in their basement, developing the application right there on this server that just kind of sat around. And one of the things I think was the hardest thing for me, and something that even still we struggle with in the cloud, is how do we size the server? How do we go about, if I have a new application, I have a number of customers that I'm hoping to serve, and of course I'm going to be the next Snapchat, I'm going to be the next Pokemon Go. Like, how do I make sure I don't overbuy hardware, but how do I make sure that I don't artificially choke myself out or can't serve my customers in a proper fashion? And so that was really always a struggle for me. But something that why it excites me about this cloud deployment conversation is some of these things, I wouldn't say don't matter, but those concerns really start to go by the wayside with how we go about building these pipelines, or really start to look into a new developing applications for the cloud and deploying those seamlessly.
Yeah. Everybody loves to buy extra hardware, right? Just buy all the hardware, just blow all your money on hardware. It's going to fix everything.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even to the point where it's like highly available. That was always a fun one. It's just, taking a look at somebody's environment today. What are we using? Okay, like, do we how much does HA matter? How much does DR matter? And going through and buying extra disks for performance or for proper RAID configurations, getting additional servers for failover. And really the role of a HA server is kind of strange. It's like its hopes and dreams and why it sits there is simply for the primary to fail. And so, it's, as you can probably think, it's kind of a time, it's quite a bit of a money sink and just day in and day out management of keeping the lights on for these servers. And so, yeah, it's been really been a change going to the cloud side, where a lot of these things are just managed with just for us to take advantage of without really having to think about it.
Yeah, so like as cloud came about, right? That problem when cloud was still new, we were still taking what was on premise and just deploying that server in the cloud, and we weren't really taking too many advantages of actually doing things in cloud. But as it has evolved over time, now the process and the benefits and flexibility of cloud are taken more advantage of. For example, serverless and containers and the portability aspects of I don't want to always be here, and the difference between just a virtual machine, which is OS based, and you have to worry about all the parameters that go into it from the boot to the disk to everything, versus serverless now, or functions now, cloud functions now, where you really don't have to think about what's going on behind the scenes or down there in the OS layer. I can just deploy my code. So all of those changes over the years have how cloud has evolved also has a lot of role to play in how deployment trends have evolved over time. So it'll be great to talk about those deployment trends. I think I can maybe give it a quick start into how do you actually build a deployment pipeline, we'll start with something really basic, something super simple, where it's like originally when you used to have virtual machines and you just moved your virtual machine into Google Cloud, for example, and and now your workload is in Compute Engine. Something as simple as that. You were traditionally using some sort of CI tool, right? It could have been, it could be any CI tool, for example, Jenkins or GitLab or anything else that you might be using, and you just push your code, you write code, and then you push it into a repository. This repository could be any repository, from Git to Bitbucket to anything that you might be using, or to cloud repository, something private. And then you once the code is committed into the Git repository, it then goes into it then kicks off this commit process, right? And then now you have the build process is then creating the build, testing the code that you have actually deployed, testing the build to say, and then from there it sends it to how you would want to deploy it. So whether you want to do a canary deployment or a rolling deployment, and then from there it just deploys to production. You might have a test environment where it first deploys to, and then it deploys to production after that. So that's kind of like the basic build process that everybody might be familiar with or used to. And as we go further, I think Seth and Travis and I together we'll talk more about how other tools and different tools come into play as we talk more about containers and cloud and hybrid and all of that. So I just wanted to kick this conversation with something super basic like that. Where do we want to go from here?
No, I wanted there's a couple things I want to point out there, right? Nowhere really in that conversation did you talk about specific operating systems, or multiple operating systems. So xMatters, we've done on-call scheduling and alerting, traditionally. And so we were monolithic, we wrote DVDs and sent them out, to people. And we had to compile them for, 6 different operating systems and several different databases. As we moved into the cloud, that process became much less much less work, really, because then we didn't have to have experts in Windows architectures and and SQL Server architectures, for example. So we were able to really streamline the application and build the application, because that's ultimately what the build process is doing, right? Is supporting the business needs. So if you are bogged down in all of this garbage of like, okay, well, what about this version of the OS, this version of the OS, and and this, so it's really taking away development cycles and support cycles and testing cycles from actually getting your business processes up and running. And then I guess the other piece, we talked a little bit and touched on it a little bit earlier, but the disassociation from hardware, the hardware conversation becomes very different when you're in the cloud versus when you're when you're in data centers.
Yeah,
right?
I think. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think you even kind of touched on it too with the xMatters transition. I mean, having to go in there and actually take a CD and install that into a server, those are such pre-configuration tasks, things that are manual efforts. I think really this world that we're starting to see and trend towards for cloud is really focused around the developers. I know at the end of the day, us as companies who are building applications, that's our mission. That's exactly what we're here to do. Keeping the lights on at a data center, buying hardware, thinking about capacity planning is just good planning, but things that aren't really focused on the objective of building new features or creating that new update or meeting your customers where they are. And so, yeah, I mean, that's I think that tells a great story where yeah, we're starting to move away from the day in, day out management, having to manually install this. We're very much so in this viewpoint now to where if I do it once, why not automate it? Why not have this something that kind of strives for that unbreakable, to where we have a proven methodology that moves time and time and time again, may have 1, 5, 50, 100 developers that are all interacting with the single application. How do we get them to all kind of swim in the same direction, be able to use tools or configurations that others have used and been successful with, and really strive towards a solid ground or a solid solution in the cloud? And so that's something that was can be done on premise. Once again, I love my hardware. I've got a great little laptop in front of me, but at the same time, it's not meant for the scale in which that a lot of companies are starting to see or even starting to build towards now.
Yeah, I think I want to touch on your, the concept of automation, right? That's what a lot of this is. Previously it was like, okay, execute the make script, make build, that outputs, some kind of artifact. You take that artifact and put it on the distributed media, in terms of DVDs. But any place that we can reduce the manual effort, means that not only can we then streamline, but also make for consistency, right? I mean, that's partly what automated tools can do. I was reviewing the SRE book from Google, which if you haven't read that, I really would recommend anybody getting in there. No, Google, shush, quiet. Sorry. But they really emphasize the consistency, right? You have a human do the same task 100 times. It's going to be the same, maybe a certain percent of those times, not 100% of the times. When you have a computer doing it, it's going to be the same every single time, with some error margin, of course. But so you have this consistency, and once you have consistency, then you have reliability, and then you can be confident, that your commit, build, and execute pipeline is reliable, that it's going to do what you expect it to do. And then you can really focus on the business processes. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so I think Priyanka, we did touch on kind of that overarching process, right? You commit some code, you might run some security scans. That's also a good time to do some testing. But what do you guys think about what's the utopia? Okay, you've got everything, you've got this awesome team, they've all done all this work, and they've built this unbreakable pipeline. What does that look like to you guys?
Yeah, I think it's that kind of what I had highlighted over is the app dev. That's kind of the end goal. Those who can write code, be able to deploy it in a seamless, almost obfuscated manner. That's really what continues to bring value and really what drives companies. And so the more and more we can automate things, of course, every step of the way, I want to be able to test and be able to test again, measure twice, cut once kind of scenarios, because a little bit of downtime or having any type of affection to the end user experience can easily create churn for your customers who are working with your products. It's competitive out there. You want to be faster. You want to be faster. You want to be cheaper. So how do you run a slim team but having this enterprise grade type of solution? That's really what I think that utopia is that what looks and feels like a massive scale application, very high performing, actually supported by a very small set of users. And so, within that realm, having DevOps to support this, security to obviously keep you within compliance if your vertical requires that, but really focusing on the application developers to take it to the next level, be able to do their job day in and day out, use the tools that they like to be productive. That's really what and worry less around the networking or the hardware, or really even at the end of the day where this thing's being deployed. As long as the app devs can focus on their task at hand, that only brings more and more value to the company.
Yeah, the more we can focus on having developers just worry about the application that they're building and deploying it, the better. So some of the tools, I wanted to touch a little bit on the types of deployments, and then we can go back into some of the tools that we can use to help build a pipeline that facilitates some of that methodology that Seth just mentioned. So we touched a little bit on this architecture that's up on the screen right now, which is you trigger the build, you actually build, and then put the code in a repository, and then from there a cloud build gets triggered, and then that is a tool. If you haven't heard of it, that's a tool within Google Cloud which helps you, which is basically helping you with the build process. It has vulnerability scans, security scans. It will go through your testing process to some extent, and then save that build into a registry. If you're using containers, you can put it in container registry, or just in a repository. If you're just using traditional virtual machines, then you could just put the output of the build into say Google Cloud Storage, for example, which is not shown here, but you could essentially do that if you were just using virtual machines. And then from there, you can decide to deploy that file into either a virtual machine that you might be using, or if you're using containers, then you can put it into a container cluster, or into GKE, or if you're using Cloud Run, which we'll talk a little bit about later, then in the serverless options as well. And from there, you have multiple different clusters that might be running. You have a load balancer. From the user's perspective, goes through the load balancer and then balances the load out into the different deployed clusters and pods that you might have. So that's kind of how it essentially works, without talking too much about the tools. But there are multiple options of tools that you could use, including open source and some within Google Cloud. So we'll talk more about those in just a second. I think it's important to understand the types of deployments as well in this whole arena, where you might want to just test out a feature, and that is A/B testing. That's more around the testing part of it, where it's like I want certain users to have to get 15% of the traffic goes through certain set of users, so I can test whether this feature is working fine or whether we actually want to roll out this feature or not. That kind of aligns with not really canary deployments, but canary deployments are along the same lines, where you're rolling out a certain release for a percentage of users, and then when you feel comfortable, you continue to roll more and more out. So you increase the percentage and you get to 100 for a specific release. Now that's canary deployments. And then the other other popular ones, there are lots of different types of deployments. I'll talk about the most popular ones. The other one is blue-green, which is where you set up your traffic, there are two sets of deployments that you already have, and you have the traffic go through one, and then the other stays without traffic. But you have the advantage that you have two parallel, identical sets of deployments that already exist, and you have the ability to route back and forth between them. And that's what a blue-green means. And it's more traditional. You do a load balancer, and then you route traffic from the load balancer into this blue deployment or this green deployment. So you set all of them up. You make sure that the new release is on one set, and then the other set, or the green one, has an older release, and then you just route traffic. So that's how the two work. And depending on which one you're choosing to be, and there's no right or wrong answer here, right? It's just more of like, these are different practices. You might choose one over the other for a specific application. You might choose one over the other just because you have you have been using tools that support one over the other. So just kind of wanted to start there, and maybe have Seth talk a little bit more about how SADA has done this for some of their products, because I think there's a great story to tell there. So maybe we should talk about that for a little bit.
Sure. So yeah, as far as the SADA name goes, SADA's been around for close to 20 years, and our very grassroots history is actually around application development. And over the years, we've have created partnerships and really have standardized on Google here in the past year and a half. And so either way, still to that grassroots feel, SADA has actually developed an internal application, technically two, known as .maps and Atom. Both of them focus more so around government, more so around like Department of Transportation, which is .maps. Atom being more of a asset tracking, asset management, asset tracking for knowing when do we need to go repair this bridge, and communicating that within different government agencies. And so either which way, for us, we're really all about eating your own dog food. And as much as we are standardized on Google, we use a lot of Google products within our own infrastructure. But nonetheless, it's really a developer story. What are tools that they're more comfortable with? What really fits the use case or the need that we're striving for? And you'll even start to see, I discussed a little bit about that decision-making process and how we decided to go with things like Travis CI within our deployment versus going with the more Google Cloud native ones. And so once again, no such thing as like a wrong answer. It's just more so as how the developers interact, or what are the tools that allow them to work quicker, better, faster, to focus on that core product. And so, yeah, I guess to really call out what we have here is very high level, kind of broad strokes, the general products that we are using here for Atom. And so, as you can see, it is a web-based client written in JavaScript. What we'll end up doing is hitting that cloud load balancer, distributing that to a backend of Kubernetes pods, which broken down into each different services contained within pods to basically do this the day in, day out tasks. Here's my front end. Here's my backend. I need to call data from either a NoSQL database or from a relational database, depending on what it is that application is trying to display. All the time, we are pulling in those new images as application developers are committing code to the Git repository. As you see here, we use GitHub, automatically builds that image, schedules it to deploy after, of course, proper testing. And a lot of our application developers are writing their own tests and be able to invoke that. Typically those who own the code tend to know good ways to go about it, but obviously miles may vary depending on how big of a company you are or how many different checkboxes of testing for security or compliance you may need to go down. But either way, once those are deployed, once we validate that testing, we're able to hit the green light, deploy that directly to production, and kind of to different deployment methodologies we had discussed here earlier. If it's a brand new feature and tested well, but not quite sure how it's going to run in production, multitude of different ways to either do that testing up front or to start to slowly roll that out to the end users, but always have that kind of that kill switch or that reverse if I ever need to go ahead and back up to a more stable version of our application.
I like that as the oh crap switch. Whoops, that's not good. Let's not do that.
Yep. Yeah, it used to not always be that way. I mean, I guess to go back to the on-prem, you go in, if you remote inside of a server and you start messing around with something, like if you're not documenting that, no one sees what you're doing. I mean, sure, you can go check out the audits and the logs as to what may have gone wrong, but just a simple semicolon in the wrong spot and everything starts crashing down. Really building these things in kind of an immutable way to where like, oh crap, isn't like a what is going on and having to search this needle in the haystack type of scenario. It's more so, oh, it broke, click, let me just redeploy it as is, and up and running we are.
Yeah, maybe go back to some of those testing frameworks, or some of that QA process, and see what went wrong there. Do you guys have a separate team that does testing? I mean, you mentioned that the application developers typically know what to test, but
yeah, I would say we're a fairly slim team as far as like our admin .map practices goes. I think it's around 10 to 12 individuals. And I'm very good friends with our software lead over there, and he was I would ask him, because me more so on the infrastructure, like I said, VMs, and now going to Kubernetes, like these are things that get me excited. And him being on the app dev side of things, I kind of ask him, how are you guys going about this, because this is real life. You guys are right here sitting next to me, and I get to kind of see the tools that I'm helping other customers use. Here it is, day in and day out, the good, the bad, the ugly. And
right.
As far as testing him goes, like how does QA testing, even deploying these go? I'm like, who on the team is responsible for the Kubernetes cluster? And he goes, we all are. And I'm like, wait, these are app dev. These, you guys are all developers. Like, what do you mean by you're all responsible for it? He's like, oh, no, like we all have, we all know how it works. We all know how to deploy or pull back or remove certain components of it. And so that's, really speaks volumes to it. Like I had mentioned, back in the day, the networking team was kind of its own isolated area. The security team is its own isolated area. And it's something I see in a lot of big enterprises where there's these big segmented teams and they all have a task at hand, but are we always swimming in the right direction? But once you start to build these tools, or be able to these tools and these paths forward for everybody to kind of jump in, and for security to say, hey, I need this and this and this, cool, add that to the test. Application developers wanting to go do this and this and this, cool, like we have a framework, we have a guiding path for you to go do those exact things. It becomes a much more group effort. But yeah, like I said, we run slim. We service Chicago's Department of Transportation with tens of thousands of different users per day. So yeah, I mean, what just a small little subset of developers can do in deploying an enterprise-based application is really the power, speaks to the power of the cloud.
I'm not sure what architecture they were using, but I find it mind-blowing that Instagram, before they got bought, was like 12 people. And they were already serving, millions of people at that point. For such a small team to be able to just scale something, it's just mind blowing. Kind of going back to the team, so xMatters we run on Google Cloud, and we have a very it's a slightly different build process, but we have several different teams that all kind of focus on general feature sets. Each team, incidentally, is named after a Star Wars planet. So we got Kashyyyk, they do docs. We've got Endor, Mustafar, Alderaan is the integrations team. They were away for a while, but now they're back. And but each team truly adopts the DevOps spirit. So there's they're pretty evenly divided between developers and operations, and then there's usually a QA person thrown in there as well. We also have an offshore QA team that does some just regression testing and things like that. But yeah, we that DevOps kind of spirit of like everybody is at least somewhat familiar with the underlying operations of the application, or at least their particular feature set. Because I think having that holistic picture of understanding what it takes to run the application, right? Again, always keeping in mind, I think the critical thing is for every developer, operations, QA, anybody to keep in mind that you're doing this for a reason. And the reason is to support the business. And if you start to lose sight of that, we're like, no, I'm network and this is my little sphere, then you're really starting to lose the bigger picture of what the organization is trying to achieve. And I think that's the DevOps ethos, right? Just break down those walls, put everybody in a room together and make them work together, as a team, right?
Yeah, and I think there's both those examples kind of touched on the fact that you really kind of have to worry about three stakeholders there, right? The developer, the operations team or person, if there's only one, and a security stakeholder. And as long as you're building the pipeline in a way that helps facilitate all the three stakeholders to be confident in a deployment, you're good. So the examples that you gave there, where the developer, easy for him to just push the code to a repository, then it builds through the build tool, including Cloud Build or Travis CI that Seth had mentioned. Could be Jenkins, could be Spinnaker, could be any other tool that you might be using, GitLab, and then from there goes into a repository or a registry where it's saved, and then kicks off and then creates a new, either a new GitHub repository for the operations person with the manifest, and then or just within the same repository create a new folder with the manifest for the ops person. Now the ops person or the team can take it and deploy it into wherever they need to deploy it. It's either it's container or a virtual machine. Not even just that, like whether it's on-prem or another cloud or any other clouds, right? Could be multi-cloud hybrid type environment. And then the security person gets access to either the same repo or that repo that was going to be deployed. And then from there, they need to apply their security rules and policies and principles in order to figure out whether the right access and those types of things are taken care of. And then from there, you're basically in your deployed phase. So it's like those three stakeholders that I thought would be great to mention here. And if you're doing the pipeline correctly and accurately, then all three would be catered for and happy. And it would be great to see how this works out. I would love for maybe Seth to give us another rundown of this one of the other architectures.
Yeah, sorry, I was catching up on the slides, but I think you kind of talked through this. Go ahead, Seth.
I think you did briefly, yeah.
Yeah, but I think as far as like the general overview, I mean, once again, we can kind of point down to the very granular. And once again, this is just how we do it. So nothing wrong. There's plenty of different other ways to do it. For instance, we have Teams, we have Slack in here for notifications. You can use other chatting products for that to alert people via, by phone call or by email or text or whatever. So it's like, once again, there's kind of multiple ways to skin the cat, and that's kind of the beauty of technology. And even looking at an operating system, there's so many out there, and it's or even languages, and we start to get into like which tool to use. A little bit becomes a little bit of a religious debate. It's really what are you used to, or what do you like using? I mean, obviously Rust is the best, and I say that tongue in cheek. But those are the kind of things where it's like, let's not battle these things through, guys. Let's just go with what we know and what fits, what it is that we're ultimately trying to do. And so, yeah, I mean, within our pipeline here, for us, it's close to full CD. We do have a manual effort to deploy it to our clusters, but nonetheless, going from from our GitHub master pulls into Travis CI, that's ultimately what builds that image, tests it by pushing it into Kubernetes and running a fleet of tests upon it. Once that's been validated and brought back into within Travis CI, it can then go, cool, push you out to Kubernetes. And of course, those everything that's created is saved here to Artifactory. As you had mentioned earlier, I think TCS, or there's other container registry or other repositories, other code container registries, or anything along that line here. For us, we found Artifactory to be something, what fit our needed, and that could have been, I'm not sure what the success criteria, what they actually wanted to, how they went about choosing it, but typically it's price, performance, or management. A lot of these developers are not wanting to manage an operating system or another product that ultimately supports the product they're building. And so the more and more we can kind of obfuscate and move our, get rid of these distractions and just rely on a tool to do what it is that it needs to do, and just go focus on the new features that we need to do, that's when things become very productive. And so, yeah, that's really just the full component here. I'll throw in there Stackdriver, which is now called Cloud Operations. It's something that we do monitor. So if anything goes wrong from a node perspective, or networking perspective, very bottom, to the node perspective, to the application, we're able to capture that, log that, and send that back for either troubleshooting, or if you need to go more advanced for us a little bit with compliance, we do need to keep log retention on for a certain duration. And so that's really just that full ecosystem of very quick, easy tools to implement, but be able to plug it in and plug it away to different other tools that may help out either the human element of reading it or be used for more so programmatic things where an application can see it and act on that and run with it.
We talked a little bit about multi-cloud. I kind of mentioned it earlier, where you could deploy it anywhere. Just so everybody here is aware, like we came out with this tool called Anthos, or platform, I should say, that supports deployment. And I think that's where that shift in cloud and from where we started this conversation today is kind of taking us, right? Where it's not always going to be about things on one cloud or on premise, or that conversation is not going to exist. What's going to happen is eventually I'm basically my application's deployed in 2 different clouds and on premise. How do I deploy? How do I create a pipeline that deploys to all of them? And just wanted to introduce that Anthos is one of those facilitates like one of those types of deployments where you can where your container, it's a tool, it's a set of multiple tools, but just summarize for the sake of this conversation, because for Anthos we can probably devote an entire day to talk about that. But to summarize it right here, it's basically choosing the open source versions of the tool. So like choosing Kubernetes or GKE, Knative, and those types of things, so that you can deploy and create containers, deploy them anywhere and not just in one place. And Anthos kind of provides you the ability to do that. So I just wanted to mention it. It's a totally separate conversation for another day. But looking at tools like that when you're starting to build a new thing, or when you're trying to bring multiple things together in one place, is also plays a lot into the deployment strategy and how to make the CI/CD pipeline easier to manage.
What kinds of can you talk about the kinds of things that go into why somebody would use multi-cloud, either multi-cloud or on-premise hybrid cloud?
Yeah, I would say there's kind of 2 factors for it. One is around compliance. Data residency is the biggest pain. So for instance, if I'm trying to think of a spot where there's not a data center for Google or AWS or Azure. But yeah, let's just say certain country, certain state, really in the medical industry, this data needs to live here. No ifs, ands, or buts. And it's, that's just the law being behind how technology's kind of come through with these days. So anyway, those use cases there where I have this application, but my customer I have a requirement, or my customer has a requirement to keep this data within this physical nebulous boundary. So at that point, that's where Anthos really comes into play. And that's great for those on-premise deployments. The other types I see it is where truly having that flexibility, I'll be candid, it's probably improbable that one of the cloud providers goes down completely fully. But if you wanted to go ahead and kind of put your eggs in multiple baskets, or be able to deliver to your customers in a way where I have customers that run on AWS and GCP, and their customers run on either AWS or GCP, and they want to be able to serve those clients. Anthos creates that very seamless way to where if you were to go build out these CI/CDs, a container is a container, but the Docker build is set standard. That Docker container is going to run on AWS or Azure or on Google. And so how do we make it in such a way to where I can be agnostic with my approach? A lot of just by building in this method, get you aligned with that closer to it. And then by standardizing or moving towards Kubernetes, which is open source, and then going within that extra mile of going with Anthos, that moves that from that 70 to 80% similar, consistent feel to deploy to AWS or GCP. Azure starts to close that gap to be around 90, 95%, to where even at the end of the day, developers don't know where it's running. They don't care where it's running. It just is.
Yeah, and then one of the other factors that comes up with customers is the migration, right? If they are migrating from on-prem to cloud, and they're in that process of in that influx state for say 6, 8, 10 months or a year of I have half of my application running on-prem, and then I'm migrating portions of it slowly, or maybe replatforming it or creating microservices off of the monolith, and the microservices are in the cloud, but my original app is still in on-premise. Those are also some of the cases where you could take advantage from Anthos, because now you have to continue to run these applications where they are in the state they are in, and then eventually you're going to get to a point where those transition phases are also great to as a use case for Anthos.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I need to move us on. Let's see, we kind of touched on that. Some best practices for seamless deployment. So now we're up and running. We've got our deployment pipeline. It's unbreakable. It's kind of amazing, and everything is working great, right?
Always.
Always, nothing should break once you've set it up. That's the norm.
Yeah, we got an artifact. We got a container.
Yeah. Well, Seth touched a little bit on Stackdriver, or now called Operations Suite, right? So there's that aspect now where you have access to how to look into some of these deployments. How is my how is my deployment doing in terms of like where how it's deployed, monitor, log, and all of that stuff. You have access to it, but you've got access to all sorts of things and logs. But I think Seth gave a really good analogy, which I loved, about the cars. Like if the car's beeping, right, or has a red thing and it's beeping, but you've never seen it, you don't really know what it is, then you're like, you're just gonna ignore it, right? I don't care, like whatever's going to burst, I don't even know what it is. So there's no point thinking about it. So I think that's where in the next stage of this conversation, we kind of want to talk a little bit about, you have all the reporting, you can do a lot with it, but there are things that you want to get automatically alerted on, or take advantage of. So I would love for you, Travis, at this point, to talk a little bit about xMatters and how some of the tooling that you guys have built kind of helps solve that side of the puzzle in terms of letting people know what they're supposed to do if things break.
Yeah, the best, having the best developers, the best pipeline, everything that you throw up in production, and everything just goes to garbage. Is you're still not meeting the needs of the business, right? They need an application that's consistently up, reliably up. So then how do you kind of deal with those aspects? Tools like the cloud, or the cloud monitoring, Stackdriver formerly known as the monitoring, formerly known as, provides you those insights. There's a whole discussion on what things you need to measure, and we're not going to get into that because that's a whole different discussion. But things like white box monitoring and black box monitoring, what's happening inside the application, what do users see from the outside, are two extremely important aspects, of how the health of the application. But kind of like what Priyanka was saying, having your check engine light but never acknowledging it, or never do anything about it, or just ignoring it, isn't going to fix the problem. The car's not going to fix itself, and then at some point you're going to have it stop working. So that's where the next step comes in, right? Alerting and notifications. So the notification is that piece that says, okay, from the architecture, from the application, something happens. Okay, now let's get that information to a human because they can do something about it. You might have some automated processes, and I really hope that people are starting to get into this automated remediation. But ultimately, sometimes those are going to have failure, or you're going to need this like safety net, right? Where you're like, oh, I have some kind of safety net so that I know that if something happens, a human will be involved. And that's where tools like xMatters comes in. And then we help with the question of, okay, what happens after you get the notification? well, okay, do you want a human to, flip the switch and say, oh, this is a major incident. We need to get some people involved. Let's, let's go find the person. Let's go find the teams that are involved in this. And get some collaboration going. Yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, so I don't know. So touching on the the monitoring aspects, you gotta look at what your objectives are. So you might have, again, going back to the SRE book, Google can't do a number of errors. Tools like Google and Twitter can't just alert on number of errors, because when you're scaling that big, if you start alerting on one error, people are going to be like, well, there's another one every couple of seconds, for whatever reason, maybe high latency from some user in the middle of nowhere, or something. So you look at more like spikes in error rates, and so those are kind of you look at these objectives, and then you have these other assorted indicators. Seth, do you guys get into some of the monitoring aspects or talk to customers?
Yeah. I mean, as far as SADA goes, yeah, that's typically I would call it a transition. People who come from on-prem or other cloud providers, we do tend to look at, how does cloud operations work? Does it work? But at the same time, we have, there's a number of partners out there like New Relic or Datadog that are also feasible, do a great job. So yeah, it's just a matter of, once again, multiple ways to skin the cat. But it comes down to what is pre-existing, what is worth putting more time and investment into. But yeah, I mean, we definitely jump into it and can get way granular as to, okay, we're starting to talk about networking, or the networking side. How are things talking to one another? If it's a multi-regional deployment, how do we ensure latency, or how do we start alerting on latency or increases in latency in that number of alerts? Yeah, we definitely help customers with that. Or moving all the way up to the top of it, things around the sides of when start breaking down multiple containers and having internode communications, what does the response time between these look like? So you can start to jump in there and either troubleshoot if it is a something that's effectively breaking our solution, or alternatively, if we're just looking to get higher performance, there's some tweaks and changes we can do from that. So yeah, we can kind of cover it all the way through from a proactive or reactive type of monitoring engagement.
Yeah, all the tools. So we're kind of getting up on the top of the hour. I'm sorry, Priyanka, did you have that, like, I had this thing?
Sorry, I was I was also on mute. I just wanted to touch quickly, close that topic with the 4 golden signals that come from the SRE book. If you haven't had a chance to read it, you should. I highly recommend it, like Travis did. The 4 golden signals that you will see there, whatever tool you use, you should definitely look for signals for latency, for traffic, for errors, and the 4th one is, I think, saturation. So you're looking for whatever tool you use, you're looking for those and alerting on those, so that somebody or some portion of the team can take action on it.
Yep. Cool. Okay. I'm going to get into just quick summary. Some of the things that we touched on. We talked a little bit about CI/CD pipelines. Generally the process of commit, build, deploy. We touched on the history, mostly just to give context. From where we came from back in the day. Really the key is for all of this to keep in mind, you got to focus on the business, not the infrastructure, right? You want to focus on the business, not the infrastructure. Ultimately the business doesn't really care if you're using, an Oracle backend or, BigQuery backend or whatever. They just have a need and they need that facilitated. So going into best practices, I guess I don't think we actually explicitly stated it, but use the tools that you're using. So you guys are using Travis CI, use Travis CI. Use Jenkins if you use Jenkins. Don't try to just adopt a tool because some random guy on a some what do they call it, the talking head said that you should. So use what you're using. Then look at the different types of deployments that might be relevant to your organization. Canary deployments, blue-green deployments. I think A/B is typically used in marketing, but I think it's also an important concept to talk about because it's can help the business. We touched on multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. And then last piece is to get the important signals to humans. All the automation in the world, is great, and that's awesome. Keep doing that, and hopefully you're not building Skynet. But there might be some things that that fall through the cracks. So you need to make sure you have some kind of safety net to get those signals to the humans. And then also think about, okay, once the signal gets to human, what happens after that? You have processes, you have tools, you have things in place to help you facilitate that, make sure that you're bridging that gap from the notification to that next piece. Okay, that was my auctioneer voice. So we got a few minutes left. We can open it up to question and answers. Looks like we got a couple of questions in there.
Yeah, we do. We've got some great questions. About 10 minutes left here. So first question is from Jose, and he's asking, should you split off the development of tests from the DevOps team and have another team do that? What's sort of a best practice around test development?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I think we kind of touched on this a little bit. I think it's going to depend on the organization. Here at xMatters, we, or at least in my office, no, at xMatters, we put the teams pretty well together. We do have an offshore dedicated QA team. They do a lot of regression testing, but having the QA embedded with developers and operations is successful for us. Seth or Priyanka, you guys want to comment?
Yeah, I think with, like I said, my Atoms and .maps team, a lot of that is owned by the same people that are managing the Kubernetes infrastructure all the way to are actually writing that front end application. So yeah, very much it's all about bringing in those alignments into it. For security teams, they may want to write their own tests, or for DevOps or app dev, people may want to be able to add their own components for performance security. So yeah, I think it's really a shared responsibility model.
Excellent. Yeah, make everybody part of the team, part of the process, right? And flexibility in how you do it. Next question is sort of related around this. Often enterprises prefer one pipeline till acceptance testing and then another pipeline for release. Do you recommend that as a best practice? Does it involve more work doing it that way? What are some of the pros and cons of that?
So I think I think this is referencing like a CI and then CD perhaps. Is that, if I'm reading that correctly?
They don't mention that, but yeah, I think essentially what it is.
Yeah, because within the CI perspective, like I could think of it like a manual deployment, and I've seen people do that. We start going to the CI/CD. Once again, it's all about vetting the technologies. I've seen there's tools out there like GitLab that does everything from the most initial code, tracking your time for how you're coding, from code repository to build, test, and deploy. And so once again, it's about what tools fit your use case the best. And so, yeah, I have. Yes, it does create a lot more to manage when you have multiple vendors or different technologies that didn't really have the thought, the insight to know what is the CI company doing and the CD company doing. It's different people developing in different ways, and so the integrations may be behind or a little bit, doesn't mesh up as well. But nonetheless, I've seen plenty of people be successful with different pipelines and different ways. But yeah, I tend to be in the camp saying keep it simple. The less we can have, the better. But once again, if it hurts too much to stick with a single one for this specific task, it's probably worth vetting the others.
I was listening to a talk by a guy from Northrop Grumman talking about the deployment of their software onto their drones, and that deployment process was pretty involved, as you can pretty well imagine. Of course, they're not doing any cloud tools for reasons. But for them, having a very complicated and doing the extra work is going to be worth it in terms of the security and then the confidence that they're deploying the artifact that they want to deploy is going to be critical for them. But for something that's not so critical, and especially if you can roll back really easily and it's not a big deal, that's going to depend on your organization.
Excellent. Priyanka, we've got a great question for you. Timothy's asking, basically for resources, any documents or case studies on moving monolithic or re-architecting monolithic applications to move into Google Cloud. What kind of resources could you make available, or could you point them to? Simple question, I know, right?
This is actually a great question. I think Travis has one of the links to the videos as the resources. So Travis and I did a video. I think it's about 15 to 20 minutes long, where we talk at length about how xMatters moved their monolithic application into Google Cloud while creating microservices. So that would be a great resource. Some of the other resources that that I have are, if they're not listed here, but I don't know if there's a way to share with people, but I have a series on Google Cloud YouTube channel called Get Cooking in Cloud, where we have a five-part episodes of how do you actually migrate a monolith into microservices and at the same time move it into cloud. So might be worth checking that out. And there's also a solution paper. If you just look for migrate monolith to microservices Google Cloud Solutions, that should pop up as the first thing. So yeah, between those 4 or 5 resources, you should get a pretty good idea of where to start. I have some Medium blogs. If you follow me on Medium, there are about 6 blogs that I've written and along the same lines on that topic, migrating monolith to microservices. So between all of those, and I can be found everywhere as P. Vergardia. So whether you're looking on Medium or GitHub or anywhere, so you'll find those resources in those 3 places. There's a ton of them. If you still feel like you need more, ping me on any of those places and I can point you to more stuff.
I can vouch for that, Priyanka. I think you are everywhere. You see your name a lot. Next question related to Google also is, is it possible to create Google infrastructure automatically? For example, a cloud formation for AWS. I guess maybe it's a Terraform question too.
Yeah, so there are multiple ways you could do it. There's a deployment manager, which is if you're used to CloudFormation, deployment manager is kind of the same thing, but it deploys in Google Cloud. So Google Cloud infrastructure deployment can be done through through deployment manager. But if you're already using something like Terraform or Ansible or things like that, right, or Puppet, then you can continue to use those as well and just deploy using APIs. So we have a lot of customers who use, because when you talk about multi-cloud and hybrid cloud environments, using one or the other is not going to be an option. So if you're already using something like Terraform or Puppet, you can just continue to use that and deploy in any of the platforms that you're in, whether in different clouds or on premise. So continue to do that, use the APIs, the CLI command line tools, and apply that into your Terraform script.
Automation for the win.
Yeah.
There you go. Excellent. How about measurements or metrics to ensure deployment not create unexpected outcomes? What would you suggest for that? Probably Travis or Seth.
Yeah. So I think Seth, maybe you can expand on this, but certainly test coverages. Just making sure that you've got test coverage. There's a lot of applications out there that can help you give you literal metrics in terms of what your test cases are covering, and if they're touching all of your code. Yeah, I think Seth, you have any others you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would think it really depends on what part of your solution this is. Is it a database? Is it front end, back end? So mileage may vary depending on which one you're looking at. I would say in different ways though, like if it's a database, maybe number of connections. Taking a look at disk and IOPS and throughput is going to be crux, especially if you're bringing up a new application that's going to be hitting that heavily. So those are certain metrics I would point to there. More so on the front end, maybe like number of connections, latency, just to ensure you have you're scaling up appropriately as needed, or that end user experience is strong as much as you can control the public internet, but nonetheless, maybe there's ways to better optimize from caching layers or using CDNs in order to achieve a much more higher performing solution.
Sorry, real quick. The Canary deployments can also help with this. We found actually a few weeks ago that there was a database query that hadn't been touched, in a long time back from a while ago, and it wasn't an issue up until we started scaling up one particular feature that we released. And so, for the longest time, it was not an issue, and then all of a sudden we did this Canary release, and it was like, okay, well, let's roll that one back. Let's reevaluate that query, and yeah. So your monitoring is going to be key there, I think.
Excellent. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour. Let me take care of a few housekeeping items, but most importantly, thank you all three of you, Priyanka, Seth, and Travis. And I must compliment you on wearing the standard webinar outfit, black shirts, logo wear, or both. So you certainly made for a good webinar in that department. It was excellent discussions. So we'll wrap things up just mentioning that we are sending an email out to all participants with a link to the recording as well as the slides. And we also have our gift card giveaway. So let's get to that. Our 2 Amazon $50 gift card. Our winners are Diana J and Fred S. And the folks at MediaOps will reach out to you. So again, join me in thanking Travis, Priyanka, and Seth for our webinar today. It's been my pleasure to be your host. Just wish everyone to be well, be safe, and be careful out there. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.